Liga forale. Iku bloj på Rusula Rusu. Holaka holala. Halago gu...
Alright, howdy, and welcome back to another episode of Film and happy sequel week. It is currently a crazy blizzard out there in Burlington. I woke up to come record this episode and I was greeted with like 4 inches of snow. So it was quite an adventure getting here, but hey, we made it. As I mentioned, happy sequel week. We are celebrating sequels. As you may have seen with the special episode of Film Asterisk releasing on 2/22/22 or Tuesday, we are deep into sequel week, and I made a comment early on in my sequel tier list that many of the films covered in that list were superhero movies and animated movies, sometimes animated superhero movies, but I wanted to come on here today with another segment of actually this week, a decade ago, and discuss superhero movies in a more intimate and focused way. So let's go back about 22, 23 years, about when I was born, to the inception of this rampant trend we've seen develop within this century. Now, the first wave of these superhero movies roughly spans from 2000 to 2003, at least I'd say, with films like Blade, X-Men, Batman Begins, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and Ang Lee's Hulk. Yes, I'm adding Ang Lee's Hulk, which kind of served as the initial successes in taking greater American and global public by storm. I mean, these were huge, the blockbusters of those years. I mean, what contended? Maybe Lord of the Rings and Star Wars? But then you've got the second wave, which for me, I kind of have spanning from 2003 to 2008. And for this, it not only diversified the field, but also was the catalyst for the first huge sequels of the genre. I mean, yeah, we got Spider-Man 2 and The Dark Knight and then X2 and X-Men The Last Stand, but we also started to get Fantastic Four, Daredevil and Elektra, Hellboy, Superman Returns, and for those of my generation, Sky High and Shark Boy and Lava Girl. And the third wave, I would argue, of this trend is the one that we have just exited, 2008 to 2019, or, for lack of a better term, the main MCU era, from Iron Man to Endgame. And any movie that lands within this era and wasn't a pre-established hit or wasn't MCU, I'll be honest, seems to find it hard making a lasting impression in the history books. Because, let's be honest, Marvel really changed the game, and they started off really strong with Iron Man and Captain America. As these first MCU movies came out, we also got the second wave sequels, Hellboy 2, Punisher 2, X-Men Origins Wolverine, Kick-Ass 2, and the much maligned Green Lantern, and many more reboots of the first wave superhero characters, namely X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman. Meanwhile, while those reboots and sequels are set up, Iron Man and Captain America are lapping everyone with their own sequels. So as we break into the 2010s, we're getting nearly 7 superhero movies a year. I mentioned a lot of names there, and it's a lot to sort through. So many names and stories and explosions and franchises. I mean, the whole thing kind of starts to make your head spin, which is why I wanted to focus on the film we're talking about today. With the Twada segment this week a decade ago, I love discussing movies that seem to have fallen through the cracks of genuine film critique. Movies that are kind of pushed off to the side because they weren't revolutionary or popular or even well done. You may have seen this previously with, I guess, our Season 2 episode of 2010's The Crazies and Season 5's episode of 2011's Dreamhouse. And, I can understand it, but I truly think every movie can be looked at with a critical and caring eye. And any movie deserves a fair shake to see if it really holds up despite the popular reception, which for this film is an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes. So today, to conclude sequel week, we are dredging up from the past a sequel that maybe should have never been. Ghost Rider 2, Spirit of Vengeance. Now again, we have seen a strong resurgence in sequels in the past 20 years, and one genre I think this is most prevalent in is the superhero movies. As the cinematic universes of Marvel and DC have helped to solidify this trend into somewhat of an expectation. It's almost something we're expecting now. The big three heroes of the MCU, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, they all got a trilogy of movies with varying amounts of success. And DC has seen it fit to continue their universe with a Batman reboot and more Wonder Woman, Shazam, and Aquaman to come. But before many of the intellectual rights were actually snatched up by all these main studios and put together, there was an interesting decade where a lot of studios would have temporary rights to make movies with specific characters. And most famously in recent history, we have seen a vicious battle between Sony and Disney for the rights to Spider-Man. But before this, there was a lot of deals that spread out rights to characters all over the place. And of these was the Marvel character Ghost Rider, a motorcycle stuntman who sells his soul to the devil and is called upon to transform into a fiery, spooky skeleton man to suck the souls of the evil. The original Ghost Rider came out in the waning moments of the second wave, 2007. And the other major films that came out that year were, well, what do we have? We have the still loved but definitely contentious Spider-Man 3, the second Fantastic Four movie. So, the year before the MCU kicks off, 2007, things are easily on the downward trend for superhero movies, and Ghost Rider doesn't particularly help its own case. You have the director of the first Daredevil movie heading this film, and overall, the original Ghost Rider is an alright film. It's an intriguing cast, including Sam Elliott, and unique origin story, fronted by some of the most 2000s editing and special effects trends you can imagine. But I think it plays off well because it was 2007. It was smack dab in the middle of those kind of visual aesthetic trends. So to kind of bring us into the story, Johnny Blaze, yes, that's his name, Johnny Blaze, is the Ghost Rider in question. He is portrayed by the ever enigmatic Nicolas Cage, who had a less than consistent track record at this point leading up to 2007. Over the 2000s, he is in movies like The Family Men, Matchstick Men, The Weatherman, and The Wicker Man. So a lot of men, but not to mention, National Treasure adaptation and Gone in 60 Seconds. But yeah, inconsistent, unpredictable, and somehow Ghost Rider lands in his lap and it goes over pretty all right. At least that's kind of how I see it. He's not bringing anything too crazy to the role, save a couple scenes where it looks like they just let Nick Cage riff for a bit too long. It feels similar to the grounded character work that he's done in other movies, but we aren't talking about the first Ghost Rider. We're moving on to the sequel, where he definitely seems to care a bit less and amp up the nonsense a bit more. And there was a little comedic slant that peeks through in quick moments in the movie, but it never synchronizes in a way where Nick Cage is bringing any added hilarity or charisma. She's just trying some stuff out. And none of it seems to fully be working. So, 2012's Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance is a weird beast for sure, because it easily would have fit within the parameters of a second wave superhero film, because it feels like it hasn't evolved a single bit from those corny 2000 action movies that it was clearly born from. Dizzying and jittery Steadicam cinematography, fast-paced editing, a weird high frame rate at times, awkward focus shifting makes this a very trippy watch in a sense, but not a trip I particularly want to go on. And also the depiction of Ghost Rider himself also has changed. Instead of the clean white skull with just flames over it, the new skull is black and charred to indicate that it actually seems to be on fire, which I like, but the CGI work on this movie is way worse than the first one, so it's hard to balance them out and say which is better. So a lot of original effects and visuals of the first movie that separated the first Ghost Rider from other superhero movies at the time seems to have completely faded away at this point and been replaced with something that definitely feels, well, I'll be honest, lowest common denominator. The bare minimum of visual storytelling that doesn't really employ any originality within the construction of the film. And we've been going on for a minute or two talking about Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance. So now I think it's important to do a quick summary of the story. And yes, I can summarize it quickly. Ghost Rider needs to protect a boy, and he's promised the Ghost Rider curse will be lifted. That's it. That's the story. You don't really need to know anything else. And I feel like the reason you don't really need to know much else about the story is just the fact that this film very much does focus on just merely visual storytelling, being an action film above anything else, looking cool and keeping your attention. For example, there is a scene where a bodyguard calls his boss, played by Kieran Hines, who plays Mephistopheles, the devil, and the transitions of shot to shot harken back a lot actually to Ang Lee's Hulk 9 years prior, where he was trying to capture what comic books kind of look like, but on the screen, and kind of working heavily with the source material. But this film is so far removed from that intentionality, it kind of is just throwing it in there to keep you in some kind of jittery sensation, as if every moment needs to be action-packed. Like, you need some constant stimulation during this movie. And as I was watching, I was trying to figure out why, and then it struck me. They were leaning so hard into the visual stimulation because the story and dialogue is doing pretty much nothing in this movie. And at this point, I don't want to say I'm coming on here and trashing this movie, but I kind of have to, because I didn't like it that much at all. I mean, for an audio example, I'm brought back to the diner scene after Ghost Rider, this demon child boy, who's kind of like the son of the devil, I guess, are in a diner. And Ghost Rider flicks the boy's head, saying,
"It was a bee. Thought it was gonna sting your face."
And then he follows it up with,
"What, you feeling better? Your leg's all healed, huh? Like, all by itself. That's weird."
Where's my mom?
Or take another moment when he is standing on the back of a truck with the kid. Like, just straight up standing on the back of, like, a truck going 60 miles per hour. Like, it's nothing. And then they have this exchange.
The machine last night,
Yeah?
you made it change.
That's how it works. Whatever he rides changes with him.
And what if we took a taxi?
I don't know.
Or a roller coaster, or a ski lift, or a camel, or a...
Dude.
Hey, what if you have to pee while you're on fire?
Oh, it's awesome. It's like a flamethrower, you know? It's like a...
And I should mention here that also there were no screenings in advance of this movie's release for critics, and maybe that's a sign of a certain kind of film you're releasing. Maybe one where you want to go to get people to watch it out of curiosity on opening weekend, and then never again. But boy, that shot of Nick Cage as Ghost Rider pissing off the side of a truck in front of that kid, burned in my memory like a searing flame from the devil. And another interesting tidbit I should add is that this movie clocks in at around 92 minutes. And to be honest, with the weird long takes at times and needlessly drawn out dialogue scenes that patch the action scenes together, this film could potentially be less than an hour. And I mean, for real, shots will just straight up hold on characters so long, and I can't understand why. And then I look at the runtime and realize that if you just do that 3 or 4 times a scene, those add up to like an extra maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and that's enough to make it a full-length film, I guess. So they were really just grasping at straws to get this released as a full-length film to begin with. And there were plenty of, again, weird things put in this movie. Not just bad, but so weird. Apart from the needless jokes or dialogue, Christopher Lambert, yes, the Highlander himself, makes a bit appearance as a monk with tattoos all over his face that apparently took so long to take off at the end of the day, he just decided to keep them on when he was back at his hotel every night for all the days he was shooting. And not to mention, the first person we meet in the film is not Nicolas Cage or the boy or the mom, it's actually Idris Elba. Yeah, Idris Elba, as a French alcoholic monk who is a member of a secret religious organization and joins forces with Nick Cage. And he's the one who tells Nick Cage to find Danny, the child. And he is also an original character and not from the comic book, which I find intriguing that this character is an original one. But, you know, he does kind of stick out from the rest. And also, Idris Elba is probably the best performance considering the script. I mean, he's really at least trying. and he's probably the most fun to watch and look at, and actually the critical reception kind of does agree with that sentiment, that they wish they got more Idris Elba. And this film also feels like it is split in half in a really weird way. You know, the first half is kind of cut and dry Eastern European CGI action film, kind of like the first two Bourne films. And then the second half of the film turns into like a pseudo-religious cult action film akin to like Da Vinci Code. Despite, you know, the first Ghost Rider from 2007 basically being a gritty Western muscle superhero film. So we're really just in a different rabbit hole at this point. And the ending does not make much sense either, because, spoiler, I'll just say it, heavy spoilers. Nick Cage sends the devil back to hell, and he saves the boy with, like, turning his Ghost Rider power into, like, the good demon of the Ghost Rider, not the bad demon. It's a whole thing. And the boy, he's alive. And Mephistopheles is gone back to hell, and he revives Danny, and the kid asks,
did we win?
I'm gonna say yes. Hell yes.
And yeah, the movie's over. And boy, I don't, wow, what the heck? It is quite an ending, you know? It is quite an ending. But we've reached the end of the movie, and I guess right now, we're going to take a quick PSA break. I'll come back, give my thoughts, and I guess we'll just talk more about the critical reception and just kind of lasting effect of this movie. We'll be right back.
Running late to class but still need that morning caffeine or hot breakfast to start your day out right? Download the Bite app by Sodexo and place your custom order for fast, easy pickup at Zyme. Open 8:30 a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m. Mondays through Fridays.
All right, everybody in the car, let's go.
What are we gonna do first when we get there, Mom? Go for a hike?
Sure.
What about canoeing? Can we go canoeing too?
I don't see why.
How long does it take to get to the forest?
It's not that far, sweetie.
Are we there yet?
Yep, we're here.
Already?
It's a short drive from your neighborhood to your naturehood. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a neighborhood park or green space near you. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the U.S. Forest Service.
Indoor baseball, anyone?
Most party fouls are pretty dumb, but if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Learn more at ultimatepartyfoul.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
All right, welcome back to Film And. We're talking about this week, a decade ago, Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, here on Sequel Week. And I just kind of ran through how the movie played, and it's very weird and very bad. And it's difficult because I went into this movie and I was like, I want to genuinely critique it. I want to look at this movie not just like, oh, this sucks. But man, it's hard. It can be hard sometimes because you really do have to push back like a lot of this really distracting and eye-catching cringiness that it's invoking with all of its visuals and its dialogue. And you have to ask, like, who is this being made for? Like, the weird jokes and the whole aesthetic of the film, I just feel like for anyone who enjoyed the first one, I can't see how they'd like the second. You know, it feels like it's for a different group of people, but I don't know who. But let's kind of get into the critical reception. Let's talk about the lasting impact of this movie, you know? I mean, I got to the end of this movie, I was like, how do I end this episode off? Like, it was bad. See you next week. You know, like I want to mention the marketing as well with the reception of this movie. And this film was heavily marketed with a mix of targeted traditional advertising and television appearances, as well as aggressive social media marketing. And this was something that was very intentional by the directors, which directing team of Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor. So it's not the same people who directed the first Daredevil and the first Ghost Rider. Different crew. These guys are known for the Crank films with Jason Statham, were already popular with a young male demographic, and further fueled early interest in the film was a presentation at the 2010 San Diego Comic-Con. So they were definitely aiming for the young male demographic, and I'm a young male. and I didn't like it. But maybe I had to be there. Maybe I had to be at San Diego Comic-Con in 2012. Really just hyped for some Ghost Rider sequel. The Rotten Tomatoes website consensus reads, with a weak script, uneven CG work, and a Nick Cage performance so predictably loony it's no longer amusing, Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance aims to be trashy fun but ends up as just plain trash. And I agree. That's a really good sentiment. You know, I don't usually take a lot of credence with Rotten Tomatoes in general, but that's a really good summation of this film. They really nail on the head right there. And as for what happened with the character, Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige announced on May 2nd, 2013, about a year after the movie's release, that the film rights to Ghost Rider had reverted back to Marvel Studios. But there were no immediate plans to make another Ghost Rider film, you know. Nick Cage said he was open to it, and then he said, oh no, my time is done, but it'd be cool to see a female Ghost Rider. It'd be cool just to see them do different stuff, but I'm finished. Kind of leaving the franchise on a really good note and good feelings. But in 2016, the Robbie Reyes incarnation of the character appeared in the Marvel Cinematic Universe through the television series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where he's portrayed by Gabriel Luna. And that is the legacy the film and the character of Ghost Rider kind of retains to this day. I do find this movie interesting because it may be the best example of one of the worst sequels in recent memory. I mean, if someone came up to me and said, hey, sequels should be banned, and then show me this movie, I mean, God, you might convince me. You might get me there. But there's also something very, I guess, alluring about the absolute ridiculous plots that are peppered throughout this film. I mean, granted, I'll never wade through the soupy bog that is this movie to get to them, but I can have a small appreciation for what they accidentally achieved. Because at points, some of those cringy Nick Cage lines are laughable. At some points, the editing and the music and just the complete production is laughable. And there's some genuine cool effects as well that I kind of dig on just as a visual storytelling trick. There's a scene where the main bodyguard of Mephistopheles, of the devil, he's kind of just like the main muscle guy, baddie, that's chasing the kid, trying to get him to the devil, and he ends up getting run over by this giant truck, like mining vehicle. Look it up. It's like a Bagger 288 is what it's called. It's one of the biggest land vehicles to ever be created. It's huge. This thing's massive. And he gets run over by one of those. He gets hit with a rock. And after the fight, like, everyone's kind of picking up from the disaster from the nearby city or whatever, and the devil shows up to kind of confront the bodyguard, and he's like, ha, can't do your dirty work anymore, I'm gonna die. And then he dies in front of the devil, and he's like, unfortunate. And then he just like touches his hand, and he just brings him back to life as a demon. And he brings him back as the demon Blackout. And Blackout's powers kind of effect in this movie is that he has the power of decay. Anything he touches turns to just like death and dust. So the way they show this is that when he kind of focuses in on someone or like gets near a group of people, they lose all sight around them. It's just kind of black, right? And then they have this weird, like, almost not 3D, where it's kind of like you have the blue and the red a bit overlapping each other, but off. It's not that, but it's almost like a rainbow. Weird, like, trippy rainbow aura around their bodies. And then that's when this guy comes in and just, like, grabs their face and turns them to dust. And that happens every time he does it in the movies. And it's pretty cool. It's probably the one effect that's going to stick with me because it's so weird and trippy, like sending people to, like, another plane of existence almost, where they can't see anything else. It's just them, and then this dude comes up with the white and the black eyes and all the hair, and he's just like, bleh. So that's pretty cool. But at the end of the day, I'm never going to come back to that. I'm never going to be like, yeah, I'm going to watch this movie just for that scene. But it's just kind of hard. I mentioned that this is a sequel that finds itself overrun by MCUs and DCEUs that were premiering at the time. You know, 2012's Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance shares 2012 with some of the heaviest hitting movies of the era. The Dark Knight Rises The Avengers, The Amazing Spider-Man, Dread, and the indie hit Chronicle. So, I mean, no wonder this thing gets left in the dust, because it feels like, at times, a relic from an era of superhero films that was already long gone, despite it occurring only 5 or 6 years earlier with the first Ghost Rider film. I mean, really, this was a 2000s film in a 2010s decade that didn't want it and probably couldn't survive it. It probably shouldn't have existed to begin with, and 10 years later, the growing landscape of the superhero movie has only continued its trajectory into an era of streaming services and cinematic universes that stretch over television as well as film, and whose self-referential nature and complete viewing necessity is kind of stronger than ever. I mean, it's kind of difficult to see where superhero movies are going, because you kind of need to watch all of them to have full context on any of them. And at this point, it's like you have to fully buy in, or you're just not getting the full story or the full experience. And that's just kind of a sucky way to make movies sometimes. And I'm not going to say I don't like them. I like a lot of them. You know, me and my buddy Andrew, we had some good times watching those. But also, you got to realize it's very similar to like the Apple of movie companies or movie franchises, where it kind of just makes you buy into fully Apple, because that's like the only thing anything works with. You need to get the Apple chargers, you need to get the Apple OS, and anything you download has to be the Apple or Mac version. And it's kind of the same with Marvel. Is like, you want to understand Multiverse of Madness? You want to understand the next Black Panther movie? All right, you should probably watch these other 3 movies and 2 TV shows that set up why these characters happen to be there. And that's a lot of time, you know, for someone who's very much just only movies and not TV shows, or only just wants to pick and choose. They're not full movies anymore, you know? They're just continuations of a greater story that you don't really just get out of a single movie experience. And that's difficult, you know? It's hard to swallow sometimes. But, I mean, that's where we are. That's the life we live in. You know, I mean, Ghost Rider 2 is the underdog in me wants to love this movie for being such a standout from the films of the time. A very unique film, you can say that. And I'll cherish it for that. But man, I gotta say, this thing is a stinker. We don't often talk about stinkers on the show, so this is kind of a new one for me. But yes, that kind of brings our sequel week to an end. That's all we got today. Thank you so much for joining Film and here on Sequel Week. If you want to see any of the movies we've talked about, you can go to my Letterboxd list, obviously linked below if you're listening to the YouTube version, but on Letterboxd at DA_N. And then any movie we talked about in the first 4 seasons of Film and, you can find on Connor's Letterboxd, Cranberry18. That is CRAND Berry 18. Have you seen Ghost Rider 2? What did you think? Was it good? Was it bad? I'm going to say it was bad, but feel free to disagree. I want to meet someone who likes this movie. Because if I can find someone who appreciates this, well, that'd just be cool. Maybe I can try and see it through their eyes, you know. But as always, big thank you to everyone listening out there. We'll be back next week with a new episode. And yeah, have a great rest of your week. And you'll be hearing from me next time.